Welcome back. In the previous session, we have discussed about the different theories of the origin of Earth. Once the prehistoric Coeozoites and protobionts were formed, which are the first living cellular forms, these underwent evolution. They progressed gradually, slowly over generations together and over a course of millions of years, resulting in the production of the rich biodiversity that we see today. We see variety of bacteria, plants, animals, protozoans, algae, fungi, etc. How did these living organisms evolve from the first single cell is what we will discuss today. Now, there are different hypotheses and theories that have been put forward to explain how new organisms arise from their ancestors. The first such effort which has been documented is by the scientist Lamarck. So, this theory is called as the transmutation theory or the theory of use and disuse of organs. According to Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, he gives a simple example of giraffe to explain his point of view. How did the present day giraffe get their long necks and long legs? According to Lamarck, their ancestors are the regular sized deer that we see currently. Once the lower covering of herbs and grass were completely grazed upon by the deer, now they had to stretch themselves so that they can reach the taller grass. So once they started stretching their necks and legs out, this resulted in forming longer necks and longer legs. Similarly, once this grass was over, they had to reach out for the small trees, the medium-sized trees and the much more taller trees. Over millions of years, this exercise of stretching out so that they could grab their foliage resulted in the current day giraffe, which have the long legs and long necks. That is the theory of use and disuse of organs, which says that if you continuously use a particular organ, it will develop and it will grow, whereas if you do not use those organs will cease to exist. So that is according to Lamarck. Of course, it's just a hypothesis. It was later disproved by one of the famous scientific experiments by August Weismann. August Weismann, he cut the tail of mice, female mice, for 21 generations. So 21 generations of mice had their tail cut, and even after 21 generations, tailless mice were not born. This experiment by August Weismann disproved the theory of use and disuse of organs. This group of scientists who believed in this, they are called as the Lamarckians, or the theory is called as Lamarckism also, which is not true. Next theory, it is the most popular one, is the theory of natural selection put forward by one of the famous scientists, Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin, on the ship HMS Beagle, had visited the Galapagos Islands, and during his stay on the Galapagos Islands, Darwin observed curious things on the island. He was surprised by the amazing amount of diversity in the type of species found on such a remote isolated island, because island is cut off from all other forms of migration. So whatever species have been formed over the years, they should have been produced on the same island. So that vacation to Galapagos Islands prompted him to propose the theory of natural selection. This is what is documented in Charles Darwin's book, that is Origin of Species, in which he very clearly documents and puts forward his idea of how new species are formed on Earth by evolution. According to Charles Darwin, organisms have an inherent biotic potential. That is, all organisms, that is sexually reproducing organisms, they can reproduce, and in a small amount of time they can produce large number of offsprings. So this happens when the resources available to the organisms are abundant in amount. So when the resources are abundant in amount, sexually reproducing organisms will continue to reproduce, and this in turn will result in the increase in their population. So in a short period of time, this geographical area is now overpopulated, because given that the resources are unlimited, organisms will keep on reproducing, and the number of individuals, population of different organisms will increase. This will result in overpopulation. In such a scenario of overpopulation, there will be struggle for existence. That is, you can witness what is called as competition. Organisms compete within themselves, so there could be intra-specific competition or there could be inter-specific competition. Of course, intra-specific competition is always more stronger and higher, because these organisms, they require the same type of resources, that could be the type of food or the right to mate. So there is competition among the organisms and between the organisms in a given area. So this competition for food, water, right to mate, space will result in competition, and finally only the fittest individuals will survive. So this is what is called as survival of the fittest. Let us focus on this particular point, survival of the fittest, and this is where the beautiful theory of Charles Darwin shows itself. According to Charles Darwin, sexually reproducing organisms will have variations in them, which is already known to you. So all organisms will contain variations, and of course sexually reproducing animals will have more variations, because they produce gametes, which are a product of genetic recombination. So new variations are produced. When two gametes fuse, it will result in further new combinations, and the organisms that are produced as a result of sexual reproduction, they are not alike. They are not alike morphologically, and genetically also they are dissimilar from the parents as well as from their offspring, from their siblings. So there is huge amount of variation that is inherent by birth in these organisms. These variations are present in the organisms. When the environmental factors change that is nature. So changes, these variations will help the organisms to adapt and adjust to the new environmental condition. For example, let us say you have a group of bacteria that is grown in a laboratory at a particular temperature, say 25 degrees Celsius. Now, after some time, you increase the temperature to say 28 degrees Celsius. You will find that most of the bacteria will not survive this sudden change in temperature, but you will also find that few bacteria are able to adapt and adjust to this new environmental change, to this new temperature. These bacteria will survive, they will reproduce, and they will pass on this ability of adaptation to their offsprings, which in turn will pass it on to their offsprings. Now, this is made possible because of the variations. So, when nature produces conditions or factors which will challenge an organism, the variations present in them will help them to adjust and survive in the new conditions. So these surviving individuals are what are called as the fittest individuals. Basically, we are talking about their reproductive fitness, not fitness in terms of their health or physical ability, but their reproductive fitness. Those organisms that do not have the favorable variations will cease to exist because they cannot adjust to the new environment. That is what is called as survival of the fittest. So those organisms which have the favorable variations will survive, and their lineage or their line of organisms will continue. This is what is called as natural selection by Charles Darwin. All sexually reproducing organisms will have variations, but only those variations which will help an organism to survive under the new conditions, these favorable variations will be selected by nature. These organisms will continue to reproduce and their line of species will survive, is what is called as natural selection, and this is taken as the basis for all the evolution that has taken place on Earth. This is one of the most accepted theories, theory of natural selection. In fact, along with Charles Darwin, another scientist, Alfred Wallace, he also proposed the same theory of natural selection independently. So Darwin developed this theory on his own. Alfred Wallace also developed his theory on his own. Both Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace, they proposed their scientific paper in front of the Linnean Society, and both these theories were accepted. Also, it is said that Charles Darwin's work, that is Origin of Species, is also influenced a scientist named Malthus. So he was a scientist who lived before Charles Darwin. Malthus, he was working on the population of species. So he was working on groups of organisms, on the population dynamics and the statistics related to the populations. So it is said that Charles Darwin's work is deeply influenced by Malthus' work on population statistics. So that is the theory of natural selection, one of the most accepted theories. The two important concepts of theory of natural selection are, one is, of course, concepts of Charles Darwin. One is branching descent. The second one is natural selection. These are the two important fundamental concepts of Charles Darwin's theory. Branching descent, which means that at some point of time all the organisms, they had a common ancestor. So from this common ancestor, branches happened, branching happened, which resulted in the different groups and lines of organisms that we see. Why does the branching happen? It happens because of natural selection, because nature is the one that is resulting in the selection of the fittest individuals. The ones that have the favorable variations will survive. They will pass these favorable variations to the next generation, and this line of organisms will survive, develop into a new species. So these are the two key concepts of Charles Darwin. Also, since we are discussing natural selection and the different theories that were put forth to explain evolution of new species, along with Charles Darwin, along with him, there was another scientist by the name of Hugo de Vries. In the beginning, Hugo de Vries, he supported Charles Darwin's work, but later, once Hugo de Vries came across the work of Gregor Johann Mendel and his conclusions on genetics, we know that Hugo de Vries was one of the scientists who was responsible for rediscovery of Gregor Johann Mendel's work on Phytogenetics and genetics. So when Hugo de Vries came across Mendel's work on genetics, he put forward his theory, which is called as the mutation theory. According to Hugo de Vries, evolution is a result of mutation. Mutation, as you know, it is a sudden change in the DNA, which is heritable. These mutations can be passed from the parent to the offspring. Because these are present in the DNA, this can be easily passed on to the offspring. So Hugo de Vries believed that mutation is the one that is responsible for evolution, for production of new species, not natural selection. So according to Charles Darwin, evolution is a gradual process. It is a very slow process. It is a step-by-step process, which is due to the phenomenon of natural selection. Whereas, according to Hugo de Vries, it is not a gradual step, it is a single step process, and it is very fast. So, mutation is responsible for evolution, not natural selection. So, this single step large mutation is what is called as saltation by Hugo de Vries. So, single step large mutation is called as saltation. And also another important difference between de Vries' theory of mutation and Charles Darwin's natural selection is, according to Charles Darwin, the evolution, that is natural selection, it has a direction. It will direct the progress of species in a particular manner, whereas mutation is directionless because they are random. They could be variable, they may not be variable. So mutations are directionless. You know, difference of opinion or a rift between Charles Darwin and Hugo de Vries. There was a group of scientists who were in favor of Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection, and some were along with Hugo de Vries' theory of mutation. So these are the two contrasting opinions on the theory of evolution. Theory of natural selection by Darwin and theory of mutation by Hugo de Vries. Currently, the accepted theory, that is the modern theory of evolution, is called as the synthetic theory, what we follow now. This synthetic theory is the most accepted one, as the name itself tells you. This modern theory is the synthesis between Darwin's idea of natural selection plus Mendel's work on genetics. So a synthesis of this is used to explain the evolution of different organisms. Some say that Charles Darwin already had an idea, or he knew about Gregor Johann Mendel's works, but he did not take them into account while explaining his idea about variations. You know, Charles Darwin says that there are variations which will help them to adapt to a natural factor or environmental factor, but he did not explain as to how these variations come and how the variations are passed from the parent to the offspring. This was not explained by Charles Darwin, which was explained by Mendel's work. You know, he very clearly says that during gamete formation the alleles will separate, and on fertilization these alleles will come back. So that is how variations are passed from parent to the offspring. These favorable variations are thus passed from one generation to another generation. New variations are created, accumulated over the years across many generations, which will result in formation of a new species. This is called as speciation, formation of new species. So that is the modern theory or the synthetic theory that is used to explain the process of evolution of different types of life forms on Earth. Next, we will discuss about what are the evidences, proof that we have for the theory of natural selection or for the theory of mutation. How do we know that evolution has taken place? Thank you.